Okay, so you want to own a piece of paradise. Not rent it. Own it. A week, every year, forever. At a resort where the towels are folded into swans and the ocean is always exactly one elevator ride away. Here's the pitch, and it's a good one. A resort representative walks you through the property. There's a pool bar, a discounted excursion, maybe a bottle of champagne that never seems to empty. 90 minutes later, you're signing a contract. $24,170. That's not a guess. That's the average price of a U.S. timeshare purchase in 2024, according to the industry's own trade group, the American Resort Development Association. $24,170 for a week a year, forever. Now here's the number that changes the picture. List that same timeshare for resale next year, and the most likely price you'll get for it is $1. Not $1,000. $1. Buyers on secondary listing sites routinely offer to cover the closing costs on top of that, just to make someone else's problem go away. And even at $1, plenty of listings sit for months with no buyer at all, because nobody wants to inherit what comes attached to it. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes explaining exactly what comes attached to it. Not because timeshares are a scam in the legal sense. They're a fully disclosed, heavily regulated, nearly $11 billion a year industry, sold by some of the most recognizable hospitality brands on earth: Marriott, Hilton, Disney, Wyndham. But because the distance between $24,000 and $1 is the entire business model, and almost nobody understands that distance until they're already standing inside it, several years and several fee increases later. This isn't a story about a company collapsing. It's a story about a product that, by design, is worth almost everything on the day you buy it, and almost nothing the moment you try to leave. Keep that gap in mind. Every layer we're about to walk through exists inside it. Let's start with the scale of this thing, because it's bigger than most people assume. Nearly 10 million American households currently own at least one timeshare interval. The U.S. industry generated an estimated $10.7 billion in sales in 2025, spread across roughly 1,400 resorts and close to 200,000 individual units. This isn't a fringe product. It's a mainstream, mature, professionally run sector of American hospitality. And on paper, the business looks genuinely strong. Timeshare resorts run at around 80% occupancy, well above the national hotel average, which sits closer to 62%. The reason is simple: you already paid. The room is prepaid. The vacation is prepaid, so people show up. A hotel has to convince a stranger to book a room every single night, over and over, forever. A timeshare resort just has to remind an owner they already own the week. That occupancy number is the industry's favorite statistic to lead with at conferences, and it's a real one. What it conveniently leaves out is what happens on the other side of the transaction, the buyer's side, after the ink dries. Because the thing you're buying, the deeded week, or the block of points, behaves nothing like real estate once you own it. A house can lose value in a bad market and gain it back in a good one. A timeshare doesn't lose value in that normal, cyclical sense. It loses almost all of it, almost immediately, on day one, and then it keeps costing you money every single year after that, for the rest of your life, and in most cases, for the rest of your children's lives too. We'll get to that part. It's the part nobody explains at the presentation. There are two basic structures underneath almost every timeshare sold in the U.S. today, and the difference matters. A deeded week gives you an actual, recorded fractional interest in a specific property. Real property law applies, which is exactly why it can be inherited, taxed, and foreclosed on like any other piece of real estate. A right-to-use or points-based membership gives you something closer to a long-term club contract, a claim on future stays, priced in a currency the company itself controls, with no underlying deed at all. Developers have been shifting steadily toward the points model for exactly the reason you'd expect. It's more flexible for the company to manage, and considerably harder for an owner to point to a specific asset and say, "This is mine, sell it." Independent surveys of existing owners have found regret rates as high as 85% among people who say they wouldn't buy again or wish they'd understood the total cost before signing. That's not a fringe complaint from a handful of unlucky buyers. That's a majority of the customer base, in an industry that's still growing its sales volume year over year, because the pool of first-time buyers who haven't heard that number yet keeps refilling itself. So here's the illusion versus the reality in one sentence. The illusion is that you're buying a vacation home. The reality is that you're buying a subscription with no cancel button, priced like a car, financed like a car, and structurally engineered to be almost impossible to resell. Let's walk through what actually happens between the moment you sign and the moment you understand what you signed, because it doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in layers, and each layer is a twist you weren't told about at the table. Layer 1, the purchase price itself, $24,170 average, according to 2024 industry data. Though a red season week at a name-brand resort like Marriott, Hilton, or Disney regularly runs $35,000 and up, and high-end fractional properties can clear into six figures. Almost nobody pays that in cash. Roughly 56% of buyers finance the purchase directly through the developer, and that financing arm isn't a courtesy, it's its own profit center. Developer financing on timeshares commonly runs somewhere between 12 and 20% interest, well above a typical mortgage, well above most auto loans. Finance a $24,000 purchase over 7 years at 17%, and total repayment climbs to roughly $42,000. You haven't stayed at the resort even once yet. You've just paid for the right to. Layer 2, the sales cost baked into that price before you ever walk through the door. The industry's own trade association has estimated the combined sales and marketing cost of a new timeshare at close to 50% of the purchase price. Not 50% profit. 50% of the sticker price goes toward the free breakfast, the 90-minute tour, the commission of the person sitting across from you, and the tour and travel department that got you to the resort in the first place. Industry insiders have a term for this: volume per guest, or VPG, the expected revenue extracted from every single person who sits through a tour, whether they buy or not. And here's why that number matters. The completion rate on those tours, the share of people who actually buy after sitting through the pitch, runs at roughly 15% industry-wide. Which means the other 85%, the free breakfasts and free excursions handed out to people who say no, still have to be paid for. They're paid for by the 15% who say yes. Layer 3, and this is the one that changes everything long after the sale: maintenance fees. Every timeshare, deeded or points-based, carries an annual maintenance fee, and it is not optional, and it does not stop. The national average now sits at roughly $1,200 a year, and it climbs by around 5% annually, which is faster than general inflation and faster than most people's raises. Run that forward. A $1,200 fee compounding at 5% a year turns into more than $5,000 a year by year 30. Added up over 3 decades of ownership, layered on top of the original purchase and financing costs, and total cost of ownership for one single week a year, forever, comfortably clears $140,000 for a product whose resale value on the open market is $1. And maintenance fees aren't even the ceiling. Resorts can, and regularly do, levy special assessments on top of the annual fee. A new roof, storm damage, a lobby renovation nobody asked for. These arrive as a bill, not a request. Owners typically have no vote that meaningfully blocks them. Surveys of owners looking to sell tell you exactly what this does over time. Roughly a third cite the fees themselves as the reason they want out, and half say they simply can no longer afford to keep paying it all. Layer 4, and the one buried deepest in the paperwork, is the one most buyers never even ask about: perpetuity. Most deeded timeshare contracts don't expire when you decide you're done with them. They don't expire when you die. In many states, they pass automatically to your heirs, along with the maintenance fee obligation attached to them. Families have been pursued, years after a parent's death, for fees that quietly accumulated on a timeshare nobody remembered existed, sitting in a probate file no one read closely enough. The vacation home you bought to enjoy in retirement can become a bill your children inherit without ever having chosen it, on a property they've never once visited. And when buyers try to finance their way out of the escalating fees rather than out of the contract itself, the exposure only compounds. Some owners borrow against home equity to cover a purchase or a special assessment, which means a missed timeshare payment can, in the worst case, put a mortgage at risk. Others borrow from a 401k, which most plans cap at half the vested balance. Either way, A product sold as a lifestyle upgrade quietly attaches itself to the two most protected pools of money most households have: their retirement and their home. Every U.S. state gives buyers a rescission period, a short legal window, typically somewhere between 3 and 15 days depending on the state, to cancel a timeshare contract penalty-free, no questions asked. It is, on paper, real consumer protection. In practice, it depends entirely on a buyer recognizing, within a matter of days, and often while still on resort property surrounded by the same sales environment that got them to sign, that they've made a decision worth reversing. Once that window closes, the rescission right is gone permanently, and everything downstream of it, the financing, the fees, the perpetuity clause, is now locked in. And the resale numbers get worse the closer you look. Even timeshares that do eventually sell on the legitimate secondary market, not the $1 eBay listings, but organized resale platforms, typically go for 50 to 70% below their original developer price. A $24,000 purchase reselling at its absolute best case might return $7,000 or $8,000 years later, after a buyer has already paid thousands more in cumulative maintenance fees along the way. The math essentially never closes in the owner's favor. It isn't designed to. So who actually makes money in this system, and how? Follow the cash, not the marketing copy. The two biggest publicly traded operators in the U.S., Marriott Vacations Worldwide and Hilton Grand Vacations, post real, substantial revenue. Marriott Vacations Worldwide generated close to $5 billion in total revenue in 2024, with an adjusted EBITDA margin above 24%, and grew total segment revenue past $5 billion in 2025, serving roughly 700,000 owner families across 120 resorts. Hilton Grand Vacations pulled in roughly $4.6 billion. These are not small-side businesses quietly attached to hospitality brands for goodwill. Vacation ownership is, on its own, a multi-billion-dollar profit engine wearing a hotel costume. The mechanism the industry itself calls development profit is the spread between what it costs a developer to build and carry a unit of inventory and what they collect from buyers, financed at double-digit interest, for the right to use a slice of that inventory once a year. Layer on financing income, the interest paid by buyers on developer loans. Layer on the ongoing management fee skimmed from every maintenance dollar collected, year after year, for as long as the contract exists. 3 separate, compounding revenue streams, sitting on top of one physical hotel room. Industry estimates put the share of every maintenance fee dollar that goes to management overhead and profit, rather than direct upkeep of the actual building, somewhere between 30 and 50%. Then there's the points system, which is where the model gets genuinely clever and genuinely difficult to escape. Instead of selling you a specific week in a specific room, many developers now sell you points, a currency with no value outside their own closed system, redeemable for stays that the company itself prices, adjusts, and can reallocate at will. The same physical inventory, the same hotel room, effectively gets sold in overlapping claims to many different point holders across a rolling calendar, with occupancy managed centrally by the operator to keep the system full. It behaves less like real estate and more like an airline seat, sold many times over, priced dynamically, controlled entirely by the company, not the person who paid for it. Think of a timeshare presentation the way a movie theater thinks about a ticket. The ticket itself is barely profitable. Theaters keep something like half of box office revenue, often less. The real money is at the concession stand, where markups on popcorn and soda can run well past 200%. In vacation ownership, the ticket is the initial sale, and it's already generating a healthy margin on its own. But the real long-term revenue, the popcorn, is everything that comes after. The financing interest, the annual maintenance fee, the owner update, meeting you're invited to on your next visit, conveniently scheduled with no additional marketing cost, since you're already standing on the property. And when an owner finally tries to leave, a second business model appears, feeding directly off the wreckage of the first. Timeshare exit companies charge distressed owners thousands of dollars up front, sometimes tens of thousands, promising to cancel a contract that the developer itself designed to be extremely difficult to cancel. Some of these exit companies are legitimate operators doing real legal work. A large share or not. We'll see exactly how large in the next section, because this second layer of the business turned out to be just as exploitable as the first one. Sometimes more so, because by the time an owner is calling an exit company, they're already frustrated, already stretched financially, and already primed to trust anyone offering a way out. A third major operator, Travel Plus Leisure Co., the company that owns the Wyndham Vacation Ownership brand after a corporate rebrand, runs the same three-layer model at a different scale, with its own points currency and its own network of resorts. Across these companies, one sales tactic recurs constantly because it's the cheapest lead the industry has: the owner update. You're already on the property, you already own the product, so there's no tour bus to pay for and no marketing funnel to run. You're simply invited to a short meeting to review your account and walk out having upgraded to more points at a higher annual fee, financed at the same double-digit rate as your original purchase. Beyond the salesperson's commission, nearly everything collected in that room is pure margin, because the cost of acquiring you as a lead was already paid years ago, the first time you sat through the 90 minutes. Across the whole chain, developer, financing arm, management company, and eventually the exit industry profiting from the fallout, the one party structurally positioned to lose money at every single step is the person who signed the original contract during a 90-minute presentation. Here's where the system's failure mode plays out in public record, with real defendants, a real dollar figure, and a documented timeline. Starting in November 2022, the U.S. Department of Justice, on behalf of the Federal Trade Commission, together with the Wisconsin Attorney General's office, filed suit against a company operating under the name Consumer Law Protection, along with a group of individual operators: George Reed, Luann Reed, Scott Jackson, Eduardo Balderas, and Christopher Carroll. The allegation: running a nationwide timeshare exit scheme that collected upfront fees from owners, disproportionately older adults, in exchange for a cancellation service the company had no real ability or intention to deliver. The pattern documented in the case follows a script that regulators have now seen repeated across the country. An owner attends what's advertised as a free timeshare exit seminar in a hotel conference room. The presentation runs for hours, citing federal cancellation laws that don't actually exist, portraying the resort as a hostile litigant about to come after the owner's other assets. Under pressure, the owner is walked into financing on the spot. In some documented cases, a new credit card opened during the pitch itself to cover an upfront exit attorney retainer that can run into 5 figures. The company then sends 1 or 2 form letters to the resort. The timeshare contract remains fully intact. The owner is now carrying new high-interest debt, on top of the maintenance fees that were the entire reason they wanted out in the first place. The case took nearly 4 years to resolve. In April 2026, a federal court granted summary judgment against the last remaining defendant, Christopher Carroll, ordering him to pay $95 million in consumer redress and a $45 million civil penalty, a combined judgment of $140 million. The court found the operation had defrauded consumers of more than $90 million, with an average individual loss of roughly $28,900 per victim. Carroll was permanently banned from selling timeshare exit services, marketing door-to-door, or engaging in the deceptive practices described in the complaint. This wasn't an isolated actor working alone. A separate case, filed years earlier by the Washington State Attorney General against a company called Reed Hine and Associates, doing business as Timeshare Exit Team, ran on nearly identical allegations. More than 2,800 Washington residents alone had signed contracts, some paying tens of thousands of dollars, for a 100% money-back guarantee the company later argued didn't actually apply if the customer's timeshare simply went into foreclosure, which the company quietly classified, internally, as a successful exit. That case settled for $2.61 million in direct restitution, with an additional $19 million in contingent penalties should the company violate the settlement terms again, a total exposure of $22 million. Zoom out, and the trend line is worse than either case alone suggests. Federal regulators track elder fraud losses broadly, not just within timeshare specifically, and even that broader number has quadrupled, from roughly $600 million in 2020 to an estimated $2.4 billion by 2024. Timeshare exit fraud sits inside that trend as one of its most persistent categories, because it targets a population that is disproportionately older, already financially strained by fees they can't escape, and specifically primed by years of rising bills, to trust anyone offering a credible-sounding way out. The collapse here isn't a company going bankrupt, the way it usually plays out in this series. It's a second industry rising directly out of the wreckage of the first one, built specifically to extract one more payment from the same victim on their way out the door. And it isn't confined to the United States. Roughly 1.5 million Europeans own a timeshare, around 600,000 of them British, and a large share of those contracts were sold along Spain's Costa del Sol and the Canary Islands, under an older, harsher generation of terms, some genuinely written in perpetuity, with no fixed end date at all. Spain passed its own timeshare law in 1998, banning exactly that. Contracts had to state a fixed duration of no more than 50 years, and sellers were barred from taking any deposit during the buyer's cooling-off period. For years, the Spanish Supreme Court sided with owners, voiding thousands of older contracts on those technical grounds and ordering refunds, sometimes doubled as a penalty. That created its own secondary industry, claims management firms who, for a cut of any refund, helped European owners challenge decades-old contracts in Spanish courts. Then the ground shifted again. More recent rulings, including a European Court of Justice decision and a unification of criteria from the Regional High Court in Malaga, have narrowed jurisdiction for these claims and made many of them far harder to win than they were a few years earlier. Some claims management firms adapted. Others had already spent years collecting upfront fees for cases that, on the current legal landscape, were never going to succeed. Same underlying structure, different continent, different legal system, same result. A product with a deliberately difficult exit generates an entire secondary economy of people offering to provide that exit, and the rules of that secondary economy keep shifting under the people caught in the middle of it. So who actually wins? Not the original owner. By the time most people fully understand what they signed, they've already paid the purchase price, financed a meaningful chunk of it at double-digit interest, covered several years of rising maintenance fees, absorbed at least one special assessment they didn't budget for, and discovered their asset is worth roughly $1 on the open resale market. Not, in the end, the exit companies that promised to help them leave, at least not the ones now facing 9- and 10-figure judgments. Though it's worth being precise here, for the years those companies operated before regulators caught up, their principals did extract real money from real people. It simply didn't survive legal scrutiny once the volume got large enough and the harm documented enough to attract a federal case. The winners are structural, not individual. First, the branded developer, Marriott, Hilton, Wyndham, and a handful of others, who collects the sale price, the financing interest, and a cut of the ongoing management fee 3 separate times on the same physical square footage, while carrying almost none of the long-term downside risk themselves. That risk sits entirely with the person who signed. Second, the points-based system itself, which lets the company resell, reprice, and reallocate the same underlying inventory indefinitely, because what it actually sold you was never really a room. It was a claim on a room, denominated in a currency only the company controls, redeemable on terms only the company sets. While the industry sells the dream of owning your vacation forever, the company that took your money is already selling that same physical unit's usage rights to someone else next week, next month, next year, because points don't require the room to sit empty waiting for you specifically. You're not the customer the system was built around. You're one of many simultaneous claims on the same asset, layered on top of each other by design, and the structure is engineered so the accumulated claims always net in the house's favor, not yours. Not because the developer set out to build a trap. Not because every salesperson on the floor is dishonest. Because a business model where the resale value collapses to near zero the moment the sale closes, and where the ongoing fee climbs faster than most incomes, was never actually optimized around the buyer holding onto the product long-term and being satisfied with it. It was optimized around the sale itself and around every renewal, upgrade, and fee increase that could be layered on afterward. The 80% occupancy rate the industry is so proud of isn't evidence the system is working for owners. It's evidence the system doesn't need owners to be happy, only present and current on their fees. So here's where it lands. An industry that generates over $10 billion a year, serving nearly 10 million households, running at 80% occupancy, genuinely useful to a lot of people who use their week every single year, love it, and never once think about resale value. And directly beside that, on the very same asset, a resale market where the honest price of what you bought is $1, a maintenance fee that compounds faster than your raises, a contract that can outlive you and land on your children, and a second industry built specifically to profit from your attempt to escape the first one. Both of those facts are true about the same product at the same time. So the question isn't whether timeshares are good or bad. That's the wrong frame entirely, and it always was. The real question is this: are you buying a week of vacation priced honestly for exactly what it is? Or are you buying an exit that doesn't exist, sold to you by a system that's already planning to sell your same room again next year? And if you're one of the nearly 10 million households who already own one, is the week you use every year worth what you're still paying for it? Or is it worth exactly what the resale market says it's worth? $1, and the buyer wants you to cover closing costs too?